Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about my spiritual awakening and give you a little bit of background on kind of where I came from, so you can kind of understand a little bit more behind the voice and my perspective on things. I guess it starts with like being a child. I was very sensitive, super emotional, um, highly sensitive. And at times I was made fun of that sensitivity and um, at times made to feel bad about it. And I really started thinking of it as a weakness. I really started thinking that even as in my teens and 20s, that my sensitivity was something that made me less than, that made me not tough in the world, and that I needed to have a thicker skin. And I thought that from various family members, boyfriends, even friends sometimes, and definitely internally myself. What was happening at that whole time, which is something that I didn't even think twice about or pay attention to, um, were these kind of magical, mysterious things happening. I was guided all the time, and I didn't even think anything of it. I remember one time I was walking down to go take a walk around this lake. And it was something that I did almost every day. I just loved walking out in nature, especially growing up in Minnesota. When the sun came out, you celebrated it by being outside. And I was taking a walk through the city. I lived in Minneapolis, and all of a sudden I felt this big push in my belly and my back. It was like, and a voice that was like inside my head that told me to go into this grocery store. And I remember saying out loud to whatever this voice was, I said, I don't want to go in there. I have nothing to do in the grocery store. I'm going for a walk. And I felt the push again. And so I was like, okay, this is weird. I'll go in. I went into the grocery store and I walked in to the doors slid open and the cold air rushed on me, like exactly what I didn't want. And I just stood there, and in my heart I was like, okay, I'm here. Now what? And I just like looked around, and all of a sudden I saw this little old man come hobbling towards me. And he gosh, he looked forlorn. He looked so sad. And as he got closer, I realized it was my favorite professor from years before. Um, and I said, hi, hi. And he looked at me and his eyes got bright, and he came over to me and we ended up talking, and he had told me how sad he was. He started crying because his mother had passed away and he felt really lonely. And it was just like this really tender, vulnerable moment with my favorite professor, who I never saw tender and vulnerable. He was a peace and justice professor. He was wonderful. And at that time, I comforted him about his mother. And I was actually having a party with a bunch of my friends that weekend. I invited him to this party. Mind you, he was like in his 80s. And he came to the party. But anyways, going back to like being in that grocery store, I talked to him for about 15, 20 minutes and hugged him, and he felt better and I felt at peace. And I walked back out and went back on my walk. And that was kind of an example of things that happened to me a lot as a kid and as a teenager, as an adult. And I didn't even think twice about it. And I just went back on my walk and had my day. But the negative side of that sensitivity is that I would cry easily. I would cry a lot. I hadn't opened up my voice. I didn't trust my instincts as far as what I was going to say and how I was going to say it and would people listen. I was dyslexic and undiagnosed. I didn't know that I was dyslexic. And so I really just grew up with kind of an insecurity inside of myself that made me feel very fragile. And I do think that this is something that a lot of people who later have a spiritual awakening can relate to. And that's why I want to talk about it. I really discredited myself all the time. Um, I remember one time hearing voices, and not the kind of voices like telling me to do anything or something like that. It didn't feel like any sort of mental breakdown, but I heard voices like it was like on a radio playing and like just kind of playing over and over again. I remember calling my a couple of my best friends to come over, and I was like, I keep hearing these voices in the house. And I look back at that now and I laugh, and I was like, I was clairaudient and I was hearing those voices. And just, my friends did think I was crazy. And that's okay. Like, they got over it pretty fast. We were 16. Um, but I always felt like I had to prove myself because I was so sensitive, and so emotional. And I had no idea that I was picking up on the energy and the emotions of people around me, places, past energies that were present still. Um, and I just thought it was all internalized. And I thought that something was wrong with me. And I was highly anxious. And I was just going to be that way for my life. When I was about a young adult, late teens, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. And that was helpful getting diagnosed because then I recognized that I actually wasn't like stupid, that I could use different techniques to understand things in a way that made sense in my brain. And once I got that diagnosis and I got special training for how to study and how to take tests and stuff like that, I excelled. It was like something turned on in me. And outside of math, um, I got really, really smart really fast, and or what I considered to be smart really fast. And then I got really addicted to proving it. I have lots of degrees, master's degrees, bachelor's degrees, nursing degrees, acupuncturist degrees, Reiki degrees, all these different degrees, and things that I started feeling like I had to prove how smart I was. So you fast forward a little bit to me being an adult, and I've always loved working. I've always been a healer, always been in the healing arts. It's just been a passion of mine. I started my acupuncture journey and learning about energy in my early 20s. I was getting acupuncture all through my teenage years, and that really changed my life in so many ways. And so I knew I was going to be a healer from a very young age. And of course, I was. Like when you're really sensitive to other people's energy and emotions, you naturally want to put your hands on them and help them, even though I was an unhealed healer and very unhealed healer. And um, I was good at healing others, but I had no idea how I needed to be healed and loved and nourished and cared for in a way that I was able to offer that to others. Um, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit here into becoming a parent and a wife. And I lived with crazy anxiety, like wild anxiety. I remember one time when my first son was little, um, I went through this period where I thought he was going to be like kidnapped, or I was worried that for some reason I wasn't going to have him. And it just like went through my head over and over and over again. And it drove me nuts, like all these worries I had as a new mom. And I think my son was like 3 or 4 years old at the time. And I don't know, maybe other people can relate to like these fears as a new mom. I went from being totally free spirited, doing whatever I wanted, traveling around the world on $5 a day, to being married and having a little baby and trying to make money and prove myself. And one night, I went to go check on my kid at like 3 in the morning. I would wake up all the time and make sure he was safe, and he wasn't in his bed. And I started running around the house trying to find him. I woke up my husband, and he's like, "Where, what? He's not in his bed." So we were looking all around, and I was like freaking out. And my energy made my husband freak out. I went back into his room. He was like under the covers. He was there the whole time. And at that moment, I was like, holy crap, I have a problem. Like, I am so scared I'm going to lose my kid. I just manifested losing my kid. And I, internalized that and thought about it. And I, quote unquote, got better and stopped doing that. But like, that's the kind of energy that I carried with me. And that, along with feeling like I needed to prove my worth, I needed to prove my worth by how hard I was, by how smart I was, by how tough I was, by how much I could get done. And it was exhausting. It was exhausting. But I kept going. I kept pushing. Um, and it worked. Like, I would increase my success levels, you know. Then I decided that I needed to go back to nursing school because I was working as an acupuncturist. I was taking care of a lot of very sick people. I loved what I did. I built great relationships with my clients. But I started recognizing that people were coming to me as a last resort. I started seeing that people were coming to me after they've tried every other alternative to getting well. And whether it was oncology or blood pressure or insomnia, it was all sorts of different paths. And I was like, wow, people need integrative medicine before they're so far gone that this is a last resort. And so I started thinking about how I wanted to be a part of that change. I wanted to be a part of this new paradigm of fully integrative medicine. And I was going to become a nurse practitioner. And I was going to become a nurse practitioner, and I was going to guide people through understanding their bodies and holistic selves from the beginning of their medical journey. I was going to get people when they came to the doctor for an annual checkup, right? And I started down this path of nursing school, still working as an acupuncturist, having a little child, um, being married, and really still being extremely sensitive and still feeling the need to prove myself. And then I got pregnant in nursing school with our second child. And I'm doing all of this and driving an hour a day to nursing school, still taking care of a select group of my patients, still trying to be an amazing mom. And I'm doing all of it. And then I graduate from nursing school. So this is like 18 months, because I already had a bachelor's degree. So I just needed the nursing part. And I'm starting to look at programs for nurse practitioner programs, which is another master's degree. And I'm pregnant and I'm put on bed rest. And everything comes crashing down. I graduate from nursing school and I immediately have to be in bed for 6 weeks. Can't even get out of bed to go downstairs to make myself a meal. I'm supposed to stay in bed and only get up to go to the bathroom and to shower. And if that's not a message from the universe, I don't know what is. But did I take that message? No, I went down into a dark tunnel of like, I can't believe I'm on bed rest. I should be playing with my 7-year-old at this time, my 6-year-old, however old he was at that time. And I started getting kind of depressed. And I didn't take that time as like a meditative time of like looking at my life. All I thought about was what I needed to do next. I still thought about all the things I need to accomplish, how I need to start this business. And it was exhausting and emotional. And then, 4 weeks later, I had my baby and we had our baby. And 3 months later, I went back to work as my first nursing job. Actually, not 3 months, 6 months later. My first nursing job in a hospital. I don't know if any of you are nurses, but nursing is probably one of the most stressful work positions I have ever done in my life, I could ever imagine doing. I mean, I had patients that were septic and I was catching it before they died, cardiac patients who had had heart attacks. I mean, 90-year-olds who fell downstairs and had internal brain bleeding. I mean, it was so intense. I'd come home after 12-hour shifts and I would just collapse. And I had a baby, I was nursing, I was pumping, I wanted to be I was a good mom, but I was exhausted. And again, I still felt like I needed to do this so that I could be a nurse practitioner and do integrative medicine and prove how valuable I was and help people. And I was slowly, dying inside. I was so exhausted. And I kept going. I kept going. I went from 3 days a week to 2 days a week, thinking that would be helpful, and it was. But it was still really overwhelming and pumping. And so I kept doing this, and then I was working one weekend, and now my baby is around a year and some old, and he gets some sort of stomach virus, and he won't stop throwing up. And, he was a baby who loved his little water bottle. He'd drink his water bottle all the time. I noticed that he had started losing weight, and I started calling doctors. I was like, the pediatric nurse lines, talking to his pediatrician, talking to some other nurse friends. I was like, yeah, I think he's losing weight. He's guzzling water all the time. And I'm kind of concerned. It really feels like something's off. I still didn't trust myself at this time fully. And everyone kept saying, no, 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 this is normal. He's more active now. He's moving around. He's really thirsty. He loves drinking his water bottle. But then he got this virus, and he was just vomiting and then guzzling water, vomiting and guzzling water. And I was like, something is really wrong. Long story short, something was really wrong. I took him to the hospital with my husband and my other child, and he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And we were in the pediatric intensive care unit for 3 days. It was horrible, horrible time. And he almost died. And I went into like a deep, dark hole. I was so mad at myself because I knew something was wrong, but everyone else kept telling me nothing was, and I believed them instead of believing me. That moment changed my life. I always believed my intuition after that. And however, I was so traumatized by the near loss of my child and everything that led up to it and everything that happened. And at that point, I decided, fuck this. I am not going back to school anymore. I had a paradigm shift inside of my mind where I was like, what am I racing for? What am I trying to prove? The most important thing in the world to me are my family, are my children and my husband, and like this life that we have together. And all of a sudden I was like, I need to be a healer for my family and for myself. I'm going to continue being a healer in the way that I am professionally, but I am not going to go to school anymore. I don't need to prove anything. I was right about my son, and I didn't believe myself. I need to figure out what my truth is. And it was heartbreaking time for me. And I did start going kind of into a little bit of a depression um, around how much our life changed, and my child's life, and worrying about his day to day and his future. And he was a baby, and I had to give him shots, sometimes 6 or 7 a day. Um, and, just so you know, we've grown greatly since then, and he's thriving. He does amazing. And as a family, we're thriving too. I want you to know that. But it was a really dark, intense period. I get choked up even like remembering how those feelings were so big and so real and so hard and so alone. And anyways, so I continued taking time off for a while. I started working as a nurse again at a different hospital, just 2 days a week, sometimes only 1 day a week. And that was going pretty good. I was still taking care of some acupuncture patients as well. I was doing both. But I really worked less than 20 hours a week at that time, and maybe only, yeah, less than 20 hours a week. And one day I was at work, and something happened to me, something that hadn't happened to me in a really long time. And I was having a pretty easy day taking care of my patients off the ED, the emergency department. And I was helping this one old man kind of like turn over or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but it was easy. And all of a sudden I heard a voice, and I heard this voice, and it was a man's voice. And I looked around, I like tried to find him, and I felt a pressure in my solar plexus, like a push again. And the voice said, Erika. And I was like, what the, I thought it was the man talking. Nobody was in the room with us. And he said, Erika, you are good at this, but I don't want you here any longer. And I got the chills. I stepped back. I took a deep breath. It was this visceral auditory voice outside of my head and this pressure in my body. And I knew how important it was to listen. And so I had a couple more hours of work that day, and I got home, and the first thing I did, I was like, went to my husband. I was like, I need to talk to you. And I told him what happened. And he said, okay, like, okay, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to put in my notice. Like, I just know that that is like the truth. That was divine truth telling me how to change my life. And so I put in this notice, and I gave them like 3 weeks or something. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. I still had this kiddo at home with type 1 diabetes, and I had my older son. And for the first time ever, I trusted, and I wasn't fighting. I always have been a fighter and battling to get somewhere, prove something, or do something. And for the first time, I didn't. I was like, I'm just going to put in my notice, and I'm going to trust. And luckily, I was in a position to be able to do that. Like, my husband, provided for us, and I could do that. And so this is around the time when COVID was starting, and COVID was really scary for us. It was scary for the world. It was really scary for us because we didn't know how it was going to affect my son's type 1 diabetes, and he was so little. And so in some ways it was like a relief to have that voice tell me to quit. And how smart was that voice to tell me I was good at it, but it's not where I belonged. So my ego was okay too. But anyway, so a few weeks later, a month later, 6 weeks later, I got this phone call out of nowhere, and it was someone inviting me to come apply for a position as an acupuncturist in an integrative wellness clinic at a hospital. And I have no idea to this day how they got my information. And they called me on my cell phone. So I went in, and they hired me. They hired me. It was the perfect position for me. And that was the beginning of things changing in my life. I worked in integrative wellness clinic. I took care of oncology patients. I was not subject to COVID on the floor in hospitals. Like, I knew my kid at home was going to be safe. And I was so deeply valued for what I was doing by my patients that it was just this beautiful experience. And I was there for years. But I want to talk about where the spiritual awakening happened. The first part was um, that voice telling me I needed to change and me actually listening. But two, COVID got really bad, and it got really dark and scary around the world. And as the person I was, as an empath and not knowing it, I was picking up so much loss and so much darkness and so much depression and people dying alone, and all the political division that was happening. And I started getting so depressed. And what happened, that coupled with the fear of not knowing what was going to happen to my child if he got sick, and the constant stress I was feeling, I started going into a depression. And I think that that's something that happens to a lot of empaths and a lot of people in general, right? But I'm really highly sensitive people. I just didn't know how to handle these surging emotions that were like filtering through me. And I didn't know that they weren't mine sometimes. And sometimes they were, but there was just so much fear and sadness and unease and dis-ease filtering through me. I had this moment one day where I recognized that I was going to lose myself unless I started finding myself. And I just had this flash one day of a visual of me sitting and meditating. And I was like, that's what I need to do. And so I started meditation really simply. I pulled up YouTube, and I was like, I should be able to find something on YouTube. And I found this guy, and some flashy meditation guy. I don't even know his name. And I started following his videos. He had a really soothing voice. And I started with like 5 minutes a day following these videos. And I did that for weeks. I'd spend like 5 minutes a day. And then I started doing 10 minutes a day. And then one day I didn't need to follow the video anymore. I was like, I can just do this on my own. And I started doing it on my own. And after a couple of days of doing it on my own, one day I was sitting there quietly. I'd probably been meditating for 10 or 15 minutes. And this surge of lightning started flashing through my body. It was like fireworks were going off in my body. And it was like orgasmic. I mean, I have never in my life felt energy moving through me like what happened that day. It was like everything that I had stored, every emotion that I had held on to, everything, all the stories and identities and disappointments and pain and probably joy and all the good things too that had been stuck in different parts of my body, all of a sudden were just like released. I had never experienced, I didn't know that as a human being, we could experience things like that. And even someone who did Reiki and acupuncture for probably 12 years at this point, I'd never felt energy like that inside of myself ever. And it just was like electricity, firework, things just exploding and releasing and moving. And I remember at one point I was like holding on to my knees and I was like holding on for dear life as things moved. And I was just going, oh my God, what is happening? And I was not scared. I was exhilarated and I was um, curious. I was curious. After that ended, however long that was, I don't know if it was 15 minutes, I don't know if it was 30 minutes, I don't know if it was an hour. I just laid there. I laid down on the floor in my bedroom and just breathed. And that's when things started changing for me. That is when things started changing. Um, After that, it was pretty wild. I didn't have the same anxiety. It was like something was released that had been held in my chest and in my heart and in my stomach my whole life. And it wasn't like mine anymore. It was gone. And I think that was the years of carrying people's emotions and energy and soaking in them, thinking that I needed to do that to be myself. I didn't have that anymore. Um, but then I started seeing things. It was like I could see out of the corner of my eye like shapes. I could see when I was lying in bed putting my kids to sleep at night. I could see orbs in the darkness in the room, and I was never afraid. I saw little flashing lights. It was like I knew it was just energy, and I knew that that was the energy of people, like loved ones and ancestors, and what we would consider ghosts. But I wasn't afraid. Not like when I had seen ghosts when I was a kid or what I thought were ghosts. Um, and this started shifting and changing, and it was happening all the time. And then one night, I was laying in bed and I had my first visitation from a spirit, and um, and it was a friend of mine's father who had died. I don't know how long ago. I don't even know if I knew he was passed. I must have known he was passed, but he gave me specific messages for my friend to share, and he came back twice. And I woke up my husband and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe what just happened to me. And my husband, of course, believed me. He gave me messages about our child that had almost died. And he told me that he was going to be okay. I mean, it was insane. It was wild. And at that point, I was like, what is going on? And I reached out to a friend of mine and I was like, I think I'm having these mediumship experiences. What do I do with it? And she helped guide me through some of that energy, and then I found some mentors to work with. Medium Michael Mayo was an amazing mentor for me. I started taking classes on understanding mediumship, and because I was like, I need to understand what's happening so I'm not scared. I have someone sitting at the end of my bed at night and telling me things about his daughter that I haven't talked to in 20 years. And I'm going to call her. I'm like, what is happening? Why is this happening? And so I'm one of those people that the universe, God really tried to gently tell me to slow down, really tried to show me that I was intuitive and that I could pay attention. I was put on bed rest for both of my babies. Two opportunities I was given to slow down and be introspective and start understanding who I was and what was shifting in my life. I didn't take them. I was kind of stupid. I was a little bit obtuse in receiving these messages about slowing down so that you can look at your life in a different way and show up in the way that we want you to show up with all of your soul and your spirit to do this work the way that you were meant to come into the world. And it took me the death, the death possibility of my child. It took me COVID and getting so lost in darkness of the world. It took me all of that to stop and to start meditating. It took me that long of living with such severe anxiety to make a change. So I hope that me telling this story that you can hear from me and make a change sooner than I did, because I had these abilities my whole life and didn't even pay attention to it. I just took it for what it was, which is great. But so as like this spiritual awakening is like unfolding and the flower petals are opening and I'm just like amazed at like this other aspect of myself that I'm allowing to come out, that's when I start recognizing the healing that God, my source, is bringing me through in this development. And the true spiritual awakening was not being able to communicate with the loved ones of others who have passed or crossed over across the veil, out of body, into spirit. Like that's a beautiful gift to be able to do that. And I love it. I love it. It's everything. But the real gift of this spiritual awakening was the healing that happened inside of my soul. The healing of believing that I had to prove myself, the healing that was so separate that I created all these separation stories of myself from others, of picking up pain of others and thinking it was mine, of old wounds, of feeling so inadequate and unworthy that I always felt a competition with other women or my sisters, or feeling afraid to speak my truth in relationships, even feeling afraid to speak my truth in myself. And all of that started changing when the fireworks went off in my body. And because all of a sudden I was free of carrying all the weight of others. But then I was given the clear message that I had a choice. Do I want to pick that all up again? Because I could easily just pick it all up again. Or do I want to grow in my spirit to be the full potential that I can be? And I don't know what the full potential is. I'm definitely not there. But I will tell you that my life has completely changed. My life has completely changed. The amount of trust I have in my own personal intuition, the amount of trust I have in my guides and my gods and my source in the light in my heart, the ancestors and those that have come before us as amazing masters and teachers. I have stepped into a totally different version of myself. And it's a version of myself that I love, a version of myself that I feel free in. And that's the gift of the spiritual awakening. The byproduct of taking the time every day to meditate and to pray and to develop this sacred light inside of myself and trust it is mediumship. It's being able to do psychic work. It's being able to feel the delicacy of and the subtleties of energy and to be able to translate that human to human for our own growth and healing. But the true gift has been my connection to the divine, my connection to the divine light inside of me and knowing that that light inside of me is the most beautiful light, that I am a drop of the ocean of divinity. And knowing that about myself now, I don't have to prove anything. It brings tears to my eyes. I don't have to prove anything to anybody anymore. It's taken out this energy of defensiveness, of fight or flight, of the constant challenge of running upstream. I used to run upstream thinking that like the harder I ran, the more I ran upstream, the more value there would be to the effort of things that I put forward. Now I don't even speak anymore unless I feel inspired to talk. I don't feel like I need to be listened to anymore. I used to feel like I had to prove how smart I was. And that is the true gift of spiritual development, is the internal peace. Because then you show up in the world with an internal peace, and you're able to release the expectation of the world giving you something. I show up in the world now, and I still feel the pain all the time. But now I know what's mine and what's not. And what's not my pain, I'm going to offer love. I'm going to try to help. I am going to bring my intention to, but I'm not going to absorb it and make it mine anymore. And so I'm not going to carry that around like a victim in my body and not even know what it is. I'm going to bring my light into the world, because my light is what the world needs. That's my gift. And we all have these gifts and these abilities, and our lights are all shining brightly in different ways. And the point of me wanting to tell this story is, for me, trauma preceded my spiritual awakening, because that was the only way I was going to listen. And I'm sorry to all of my beautiful guides and guardians and God, who really, really tried to show me over and over and over again in my life. I could tell you so many stories, and I'm sure on this podcast I will. But let this be something that maybe you can hear, to take time for your spiritual self, for your spiritual growth before trauma hits. That would be an offering that I'd like to share with you. And I hope that you know that you found this story interesting. And if you didn't, I apologize. Yeah, I make no promises here. This is just my old little boring life. But nothing has changed my life like my spiritual awakening. And I anticipate I'll have many more spiritual awakenings. And I am not perfect, but I will tell you I'm different. And I'm grateful for that. I'm so grateful that God never gave up on me. And now I know that God never gives up on anybody. And I say God, you can say goddess, you can say it however you want, but the divine light, the divine love that connects us all, that turns my beautiful light, this beautiful glowing ember inside of me on. And I see that in everybody now. I see it in everything. I see it in every blade of grass. I feel it on a windy day. I see it in the suffering of pain around the world and those who are helping each other. I see it in releasing division. And that's what I want to share today. And I hope you like this episode. If you do, like and follow, and I'll keep them coming. And I do have a couple of things coming up I wanted to share with you. I have an in-person workshop happening in Colorado. So if you live in Colorado and you want to come to this workshop in September, reach out to me. I have an ongoing mediumship development class. It's really the baseline of understanding your mediumship abilities. But even before that, like how you find them, how you find that part of yourself. I want to show you. Everybody has it. And I want everybody to have the experience of stepping into their full potential as their spiritual being as we live these human lives. If you want more info about me, you can find it at my website, spiritualmediumerika.com, and Erika is spelled with a K. And my Instagram is at We Are All Healers. Have a beautiful day, and thank you for listening. Bye.